They said she'd never amount to anything more than a dreamer wasting her time on computers. My brother-in-law shook his head at last year's family reunion, pointing at my daughter hunched over her laptop. Some kids just aren't cut out for the real world. But this year, when he walked into our family reunion and saw the company logo on every banner and table setting, his face went pale. Because the dreamer he'd dismissed had just bought Peterson Associates, the same company where he'd worked middle management for 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Sarah Chen, 42 years old, and I've spent the last 2 decades raising my daughter Emma as a single mother. People love to tell you that being a single parent is hard, but what they don't tell you is how much harder it becomes when your own family decides your child is destined for failure before she's even had a chance to prove herself. Emma isn't just my daughter. She's my whole world, my greatest achievement, and apparently, according to my family, my biggest mistake. We live in Portland, Oregon, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that Emma transformed into something that looks like mission control, cables snaking across the floor, multiple monitors glowing at all hours, and the constant hum of servers that she built from scratch in what used to be our dining room. To most people, it looks like chaos. To Emma, it's her laboratory, her creative space, her empire in the making. She's 25 now, but she's been like this since she was 12, always tinkering, always coding, always building something that adults couldn't understand. My family never got it. My older sister Rebecca runs a successful accounting firm, with her husband Michael. They've got 2 kids, both in traditional careers. One's a doctor, the other's a lawyer. Perfect, predictable, respectable. Then there's my youngest brother David, who followed in our father's footsteps and became a successful real estate developer. His son just graduated from law school, summa cum laude. And then there's me, the middle child who had Emma young, never married the father, and raised what they considered a problem child, who preferred computers to people. Emma was always different. While other kids were playing with dolls or action figures, she was taking apart our old computer to see how it worked. By age 10, she was building websites for fun. By 15, she was making more money freelancing than I was making at my part-time graphic design jobs. But my family saw none of this as legitimate success. To them, anything that happened on a computer screen wasn't real work. I remember when Emma was 17, fresh out of high school, a year early because she'd tested out of most subjects. She announced she was skipping college to start her own tech company. The family erupted. Uncle Robert, who owns a chain of furniture stores, actually laughed out loud. Kids these days think they can just skip the hard work and get rich quick, off some computer nonsense. Aunt Patricia, Rebecca's mother-in-law who somehow inserted herself into every family decision, shook her head sadly. "Sarah, you need to make her go to college. She's going to ruin her life chasing these fantasies." But Emma wasn't chasing fantasies. She was building them into reality. At 17, she launched her first startup, a mobile app that helped college students find and share textbooks. It failed within 6 months. The family saw this as proof they'd been right all along. What they didn't see was Emma staying up all night for weeks, analyzing what went wrong, learning from every mistake, already planning her next venture. Her second company, started when she was 19, developed software for small businesses to manage their inventory. It did better, actually turned a profit, but Emma sold it after 2 years. Again, the family whispered about her lack of commitment and inability to stick with anything. They didn't understand that Emma wasn't failing. She was learning, growing, building her skills and her network with each venture. By 21, Emma had started her third company, focusing on cybersecurity solutions for mid-sized companies. This time, she was more strategic, more experienced. She hired a small team, secured proper funding, and built something remarkable. but the family's attitude hadn't changed. At Rebecca's 50th birthday party, Michael pulled me aside and said with genuine concern, "Sarah, don't you think it's time Emma got a real job? This computer hobby of hers isn't going to pay the bills forever." I wanted to scream that Emma was paying not just her own bills, but helping with mine too. That her hobby was generating 6 figures in revenue. That she employed 12 people. But I'd learned years ago that defending Emma only made them more certain she was headed for disaster, and that I was an irresponsible mother for enabling her. The worst part wasn't their dismissal of Emma's achievements. It was how they treated her at family gatherings. They'd ask the other cousins about their jobs, their relationships, their 5-year plans. With Emma, the conversation never went beyond "still doing the computer thing?" followed by a quick subject change. She became invisible at her own family events, dismissed as the oddball who would never quite fit into their version of success. Emma handled it with grace I never could have managed at her age. She'd arrive at family dinners with a genuine smile, ask about everyone's lives, bring thoughtful gifts, and never once mentioned her business accomplishments unless directly asked, which rarely happened. She'd sit quietly during dinner conversations about real careers and building something lasting, even though she was doing both in ways they couldn't recognize. I watched my brilliant, hardworking daughter shrink herself to fit into spaces that were never meant for her, and I hated myself for not being strong enough to change it. Part of me wanted to skip these gatherings entirely, but Emma always insisted we go. "They're family, Mom," she'd say. "And besides, someday they'll understand." The turning point came 2 years ago at Christmas dinner. David had just closed a major real estate deal and was holding court about building something that matters, something you can touch. He gestured broadly with his wine glass, his voice getting louder with each sip. "That's the difference between my generation and these kids. We understand the value of hard work, of building something real." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Uncle Robert nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. These internet companies, this technology stuff, it's all smoke and mirrors. Here today, gone tomorrow. You need something solid, something proven." Emma was sitting next to me, cutting her ham into perfectly small pieces, her jaw tight but her expression calm. I could feel the tension radiating from her, but she said, "Nothing." She never did. "Take Emma, for example," David continued, and my heart sank. "Sweet kid, really smart, but she's been chasing these computer dreams for years. How many companies has it been now? 3? 4? At what point do you accept that maybe it's time for a backup plan?" The table went quiet except for the clink of silverware. Emma set down her fork and looked up at her uncle. Really looked. At him, not the polite, distant glance she usually gave family members who questioned her life choices. 3 companies, she said quietly. And I learned something valuable from each one. Learning is fine, David said, his tone patronizing. But at some point, you need to produce results. You need to build something that lasts. Emma smiled. Then a small, knowing smile that I'd seen her use in business meetings when someone underestimated her. You're absolutely right, Uncle David. Building something that lasts is exactly what I'm working on now. Rebecca jumped in, trying to smooth over the conversation. We're all proud of Emma's ambition. We just worry about stability, about her future. Her future, Aunt Patricia added, depends on making smart choices now. These technology fads, come and go but tried and true businesses, like Peterson Associates? Emma asked innocently. The table fell silent. Peterson Associates was a Portland-based consulting firm that handled marketing and business development for mid-sized companies. Michael had worked there for 15 years, climbing from junior associate to senior manager. David had used them for several real estate marketing campaigns. Even Uncle Robert had hired them to revamp his furniture store's advertising strategy. In our family, Peterson Associates represented the gold standard of real business. Established, respectable, profitable. Well, yes, David said, raising his glass. Now that's a company built to last. Been around for 30 years, weathered every economic storm. That's the kind of business you can build a career on. Emma nodded thoughtfully. They are impressive. Very established. Very traditional. Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully, but before I could process it, the conversation moved on to other topics. Emma went back to eating her dinner, back to being the family's invisible member, but I caught her glancing at her phone several times throughout the evening. Later, when we were driving home, I asked her about the Peterson Associates comment. Just curious about their business model, she said simply. They've been successful for a long time. There's always something to learn from that. I didn't think much of it at the time. Emma was always studying other businesses, always looking for inspiration or lessons she could apply to her own work. But now, looking back, I wonder if she was already planning what would happen at this year's reunion. The months following that Christmas dinner were different. Emma seemed more focused, more intense than usual. She traveled more frequently, meeting with investors and partners. Her team expanded. The servers in our dining room multiplied until I could barely squeeze through to the kitchen. But she didn't talk about what she was working on, not even to me. It's complicated, Mom, she'd say when I asked. But it's big. Bigger than anything I've done before. I trusted her. I always had. Emma had never been the type to exaggerate or oversell. If she said something was big, it was. But I had no idea just how big until the reunion invitations arrived, and I realized Emma had volunteered to host this year's gathering. Host? I asked, staring at the elegant invitation with its embossed lettering. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Where exactly are we going to put 30 people? She grinned, that mischievous smile she'd had since childhood when she was planning something spectacular. Don't worry about that, Mom. I've got it handled. But the cost? Mom. She took my hands in hers, suddenly serious. Trust me. I've got this. And she did. Because 3 weeks before the reunion, Emma closed the deal that changed everything. She didn't just buy Peterson Associates. She acquired them in a merger that created the largest marketing and technology consulting firm in the Pacific Northwest. The girl who'd been dismissed as a dreamer who would never amount to anything had just become the CEO of a company that employed over 200 people, including several of our family members. But she didn't tell anyone. Not even me. Not completely. I knew something big had happened when she moved us out of our apartment and into a beautiful house in the hills overlooking Portland. When I asked about it, she just smiled and said, "Early. Reunion present, Mom. We're going to need the space." The reunion invitation had listed the location as the Peterson Estate, a sprawling property that Peterson Associates used for corporate retreats and client entertainment. I assumed Emma had somehow rented it, maybe as an extravagant gesture to impress the family who'd never taken her seriously. I never imagined she owned it. The morning of the reunion, Emma was up early, dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, checking and rechecking the arrangements with the catering staff. She seemed calm, but I could see the anticipation in her eyes, the careful planning behind every detail. I said, watching her adjust a centerpiece for the 3rd time. What aren't you telling me? She looked up, and for a moment I saw not the successful businesswoman she'd become, but the 12-year-old girl who used to build websites in her bedroom, dreaming of changing the world one line of code at a time. You'll see, Mom, she said softly. You'll see that all those years of believing in me weren't wasted. You'll see that sometimes the dreamers are the ones who build the biggest realities. As I watched her put the finishing touches on what I thought was just another family gathering, I realized that this wasn't just a reunion. This was Emma's moment. After years of being dismissed, overlooked, and written off, she was about to show our family exactly what she'd built while they weren't paying attention. I thought about all the times I'd wanted to defend her, all the times I'd bitten my tongue, while they questioned her choices and predicted her failure. I thought about the strength it had taken for her to keep showing up, to keep being kind to people who couldn't see her worth. And I realized that in just a few hours, everything was going to change. The first cars started arriving at noon, family members stepping out and looking around with barely concealed surprise at the elegant estate, the professional staff, the obvious expense of the event. I watched from the window as David and Michael exchanged glances, clearly wondering how Emma had managed to afford such a venue. Rebecca arrived with her family, looking polished and confident as always, ready to hold court about her children's latest achievements. Uncle Robert pulled up, in his Lexus, scanning the property like he was evaluating its worth. Aunt Patricia emerged from her son's car, already wearing the expression she reserved for family events, where she appointed herself the unofficial judge of everyone's life choices. And through it all, Emma stood by the front door, greeting each arrival with genuine warmth, accepting compliments about the beautiful venue with gracious deflection. "I'm so glad you could make it," she'd say, rather than taking credit for the elaborate arrangements. I knew that in about an hour, when everyone was seated for dinner, when the wine had loosened tongues and the conversation turned to careers and achievements, when the familiar pattern of who mattered and who didn't began to assert itself, everything was going to change. Because this year, the girl they'd written off as a failure owned the building they were sitting in. She employed the people they considered successful. She'd built an empire while they were busy explaining why she'd never amount to anything. And I couldn't wait to see their faces when they realized it. As I watched Emma move through the gathering, ensuring everyone felt welcome, making sure every detail was perfect, I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost brought me to tears. Not just pride in her success, though that was overwhelming, but pride in how she'd chosen to reveal it. Not with cruelty or petty revenge, but with grace, with class, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she'd accomplished. The dreamer was about to wake them all up, and I had the best seat in the house to watch it happen. The gathering moved like clockwork, exactly as Emma had orchestrated. By 2 p.m., everyone had arrived and mingled through the estate's manicured gardens, sipping champagne and admiring the view of Portland sprawling below. The staff moved seamlessly between guests, ensuring glasses stayed full and conversations flowed. But I noticed Emma's eyes tracking every detail, every interaction, like a director watching her masterpiece unfold. What struck me most wasn't the obvious wealth on display, the crystal chandeliers, the artwork on the walls, the perfectly manicured grounds, but how Emma had managed to create an atmosphere that felt both impressive and welcoming. She'd somehow turned what could have been an intimidating power play into genuine hospitality. I watched my family navigate this new environment, some adapting better than others. Rebecca moved through the space like she belonged there, commenting knowledgeably about the architecture and interior design. But I caught her taking discreet photos with her phone, already planning how she'd describe this event to her friends, back home. David seemed more uncomfortable, his usual confident swagger dampened by surroundings that clearly outclassed anything he'd experienced. Uncle Robert was in full real estate mode, examining crown molding and testing the quality of fixtures when he thought no one was looking. "This place has got to be worth $15 million easy," I overheard him telling his wife. "Maybe 20. Who did you say owned it?" "Peterson Associates," Michael answered automatically. "They use it for corporate events. I've been here for a few company parties over the years." Right, Robert nodded. "Makes sense, though. I'm surprised they'd rent it out for a private family reunion. Must have cost a fortune." That's when I realized the first brilliant layer of Emma's plan. By choosing this venue, she wasn't just showing off. She was creating a context where The eventual revelation would hit even harder. Everyone knew Peterson Associates. They respected it. Some of them had worked with the company, been to events here before. The place represented everything they valued: established success, traditional business acumen, old money respectability. Emma appeared beside me holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You look like you're analyzing something," she said, handing me a glass. "Just watching," I replied. "You've really outdone yourself with this place." She smiled, but I caught something in her expression. Nervousness, maybe, or anticipation so intense it was making her vibrate with energy. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret it? Supporting me all these years when everyone said I was wasting my time?" The question caught me off guard. I turned to face her fully, this brilliant woman who'd somehow grown from the obsessive 12-year-old building computers in her bedroom into someone who could command rooms like this. "Emma, look around you," I said. "Look what you've built." How could I ever regret believing in that? Even when I failed? When the first company crashed and burned? "Especially then," I said firmly. "Because you got back up. You learned. You tried again. That's not failure, sweetheart. That's courage." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. Years of family skepticism had left deeper scars than I'd realized. Success hadn't erased the doubt they'd planted. It had just covered it over like expensive paint over old cracks. "They're going to understand today," I continued. "All of them. They're going to see what I've always seen." Before she could respond, Cousin Jennifer, Rebecca's daughter, the doctor, approached with her husband, Tom. Jennifer had always been polite to Emma, but distant, the way successful people are polite to family members they consider beneath their notice. "Emma, this place is incredible," Jennifer said, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they're surprised by something that exceeds their expectations. "How did you manage to book the Peterson estate? I heard they're usually completely booked years in advance." "I have my ways," Emma replied with a mysterious smile. "I'm just glad everyone could make it. It's been too long since we've all been together." Tom, who'd been quietly nursing his drink, suddenly looked up. "Wait, Peterson Associates? I know that company. They handled the marketing campaign for our hospital's new cardiac wing last year. Brilliant work. Completely revolutionized our patient outreach." Emma's smile widened slightly. "They are quite good at what they do." "The CEO gave a presentation to our board," Tom continued, warming to the subject. "Young woman, actually. Really impressive. Emma something. Emma? Chen, I think? No relation, I assume?" The moment stretched like rubber about to snap. I watched Emma's face, saw the calculation behind her eyes, the decision being made in real time. She could reveal everything now, steal the thunder from her carefully planned moment, or she could wait. "No relation," she said simply, and I nearly choked on my water. Jennifer laughed. "That would have been quite a coincidence. Though our Emma is certainly smart enough to run a company like that, aren't you, Em?" There it was, that particular brand of family condescension wrapped in a compliment. Our Emma, as if she were a family pet rather than a grown woman. Smart enough, as if intelligence alone could somehow compensate for her obvious lack of real-world business sense. "That's very kind of you to say," Emma replied, her voice level. Tom nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the undercurrent. "You should look into technology consulting, Emma. It's really where the future is. This Peterson and Associates CEO has built an empire in just a few years. Started from nothing, I heard. Real self-made success story." "Is that so?" Emma asked, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. "Oh, yes," Jennifer chimed in. "We should all be so lucky, though I suppose there's something to be said for choosing a stable, proven career path." She glanced meaningfully between Emma and Tom, as if her own medical career needed defending against the theoretical threat of entrepreneurship. As they moved away to refill their drinks, Emma turned to me with raised eyebrows. Did that really just happen? Dr. Jennifer just told the CEO of Peterson Associates that she should consider getting into technology consulting, I confirmed. While standing in a building that CEO owns. Emma burst into laughter. Real laughter, not the polite chuckle she usually gave family members. You know what the best part is? Tom's hospital was our first major client after the merger. Jennifer's cardiac wing expansion exists because of contracts I personally negotiated. You're kidding. 3-year deal worth $8 million. I sat in a conference room with Tom and Jennifer's head of marketing for 6 hours hammering out the details. She shook her head in amazement. Jennifer was at the hospital that day. She walked past the conference room while I was presenting. She looked right through me. The absurdity of it was staggering, but also heartbreaking. These people knew Emma's work. They'd benefited from it, praised it, relied on it. They just didn't know it was hers because they couldn't imagine someone like her, someone they'd written off, being capable of that level of success. As the afternoon progressed, I collected more stories like this. David had unknowingly used Emma's company for the marketing campaign that sold his luxury condo development last year. Uncle Robert's furniture stores had seen a 30% increase in sales after implementing a customer management system Emma's team designed. Aunt Patricia's son worked at a tech startup that had been acquired by a subsidiary of Emma's holding company. They were all living in a business ecosystem Emma had helped create, and none of them knew it. The formal dinner began at 6. Emma had arranged the seating carefully. I found myself between Rebecca and Michael, with Emma across from me next to Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia. The power dynamics of our family were on full display in that seating chart. As the first course was served, a delicate butternut squash soup with truffle oil, Rebecca leaned over to me. Sarah, you must tell me how Emma managed all this. The venue, the catering, the staff. It's all so professional. She's very good at organizing things, I replied carefully. Still, the expense. Rebecca's voice carried that particular note of concern that really meant judgment. I hope she hasn't overextended herself trying to impress everyone. Before I could respond, David's voice boomed from the head of the table. I have to say, Emma, you've really outdone yourself here. Though I have to ask, and don't take this the wrong way, but how exactly does someone in your situation afford something like this? The table went quiet, except for the soft clink of silverware. Emma looked up from her soup, her expression calm and unbothered. I've been fortunate in my business ventures, she said simply. Right, the internet thing, Uncle Robert chimed in. Though I have to wonder if this might be a bit much. I mean, it's all very impressive, but sometimes it's better to live within your means, you know? Start small, build slowly. Aunt Patricia nodded sagely. Robert's absolutely right. My neighbor's son got into day trading, made some quick money, and thought he was the next Wolf of Wall Street. Lost everything within 6 months. These technology bubbles can be so unpredictable. I felt my jaw clench. Here was Emma, hosting them at a venue that cost more per night than most people made in a year, and they were lecturing her about fiscal responsibility. Patricia makes an excellent point, Michael added, clearly feeling the need to contribute. In my experience at Peterson Associates, we see a lot of startups come and go. The ones that last are the ones that maintain steady, sustainable growth, not trying to bite off more than they can chew. Emma set down her spoon with careful precision. And what would you say constitutes sustainable growth in today's market? Michael straightened, clearly pleased to be asked his professional opinion. Well, at Peterson Associates, we work with clients who typically see 10 to 15% growth year over year. That's solid, dependable expansion. None of this boom or bust mentality you see with these tech startups. Interesting, Emma said. What about merger and acquisition strategies? How does Peterson Associates view those as growth mechanisms? Oh, well, that's really more for established companies, Michael explained, his tone becoming slightly condescending. M&A is complex, high-stakes business. It requires significant capital reserves, extensive market research, legal teams. It's not something a small startup would typically be involved in. David laughed. Michael, you're talking to Emma like she's about to buy a company. The entire table chuckled at this apparently absurd notion. All except Emma, who just smiled and took a sip of her wine. Actually, she said quietly, that's exactly what I did. The laughter stopped abruptly. Rebecca looked confused. What did you do? I bought a company, Emma repeated, her voice still calm, still controlled. Peterson Associates, actually. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as understanding slowly dawned on face after face around the table. Michael went pale. David's mouth opened and closed without sound. Uncle Robert's fork clattered to his plate. You're joking, Rebecca managed finally. Emma reached into her purse and pulled out a folder of documents. She passed them to Michael first. Merger papers were finalized 2 weeks ago. You'll find them all in order. Michael's hands shook as he opened the folder. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally, a kind of sick recognition. This says Chen Enterprises acquired Peterson Associates for... He looked up, his voice barely a whisper. Emma, this can't be right. $140 million, Emma confirmed. We also acquired their subsidiary companies, their client roster, and their real estate holdings, including this estate. The revelation hit the table like a physical force. I watched 30 years of family dynamics crumble in real time. These people who had spent decades condescending to my daughter, dismissing her work, predicting her failure, were suddenly faced with the reality that she had just become their boss. Aunt Patricia was shaking her head slowly. That's impossible. You're 25 years old. You don't have that kind of money. You're right, Emma said. I'm 25. And you're also right that I didn't have that kind of cash on hand. Which is why it was a strategic merger involving 3 of my companies, 2 venture capital firms, and a consortium of angel investors who've been following my work for years. She stood up, moving to the head of the table where David had been, holding court just minutes before. What I did have was a proven track record of building companies that generated sustainable, profitable growth. I had a team of developers and strategists that major corporations were fighting to poach. I had proprietary technology that was revolutionizing how mid-sized businesses approach marketing and customer relations. David found his voice. But you failed. Your first company failed. My first company taught me what didn't work, Emma corrected. My second company taught me how to build something that does work. My third company taught me how to scale. And my fourth company taught me how to identify acquisition targets that would amplify everything I'd already built. She gestured around the room. Peterson Associates wasn't just a purchase. It was a strategic acquisition that allowed me to expand into traditional consulting while maintaining our technological edge. We're not replacing what they do. We're enhancing it. Michael was still staring at the papers. The CEO. Chen. That's you. You're the one who gave the presentation to our biggest clients. You're the one who restructured our entire client services division. I preferred to work behind the scenes initially, Emma admitted. Let the Peterson Associates name maintain its reputation while we integrated our technologies. But yes, that was me. Uncle Robert was doing calculations in his head. I could see it. If you own Peterson Associates, then you own. The marketing contracts for your furniture stores, yes, Emma confirmed. Your 15% sales increase last quarter? That was us implementing a new customer retention system. She looked at David. Your luxury condo development that sold out in record time. We handled that campaign. Her gaze moved to Jennifer, who had gone completely silent. The cardiac wing expansion at your hospital? 3-year contract? One of our most successful healthcare initiatives. Emma sat back down, but the power dynamics of the table had completely reversed. She was no longer the family member they tolerated out of obligation. She was the most successful person at the table, and everyone knew it. I don't understand, Rebecca said slowly. Why didn't you tell us? Emma's expression softened slightly. Would you have believed me? 2 years ago, when I told you I was working on my biggest project yet, Uncle David laughed and said I should get a backup plan. Last Christmas, when I mentioned I was expanding my team, Aunt Patricia suggested I take some business courses at the community college first. The accusations hung in the air because everyone knew they were true. I remembered those conversations, the dismissive laughter, the well-meaning but condescending advice. You never asked, Emma continued. You never asked what I was building or how it worked. You just assumed that because it involved computers, because it wasn't traditional, it couldn't be real. You never once considered that maybe, just maybe, you didn't understand what I was doing well enough to judge whether it would succeed or fail. Michael cleared his throat. Emma, I owe you an apology. We all do. Emma shook her head. I don't need apologies. What I needed was your faith in me when I was building this. What I needed was for someone besides Mom to believe that maybe, just maybe, the family dreamer might actually know what she was doing. She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. I spent so many years shrinking myself at these gatherings, listening to lectures about real careers and stable choices and practical decisions. Watching you celebrate every traditional milestone while treating my achievements like hobbies. Tears were starting to form in her eyes, but her voice stayed strong. Do you know how many times I wanted to give up? How many nights I sat at my computer wondering if maybe you were all right. Maybe I was just deluding myself. I reached across the table and took her hand. But you didn't give up. No, she said, squeezing my fingers, because someone believed in me. Someone saw what I was building and said, yes, keep going, you can do this. The room was quiet, except for the soft background music Emma had chosen, a string quartet playing contemporary pieces, bridging the gap between classical elegance and modern innovation. Just like everything else about this evening, David was the first to speak. Emma, I don't know what to say. Say you're proud of me, she said simply. Say you're proud that your niece built something extraordinary. Say you're proud that the kid you thought would never amount to. Anything just proved that success comes in forms you didn't recognize. I am, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. I am so incredibly proud of you, and I'm ashamed that it took this for me to see it. One by one, the rest of the family echoed similar sentiments. Apologies mixed with congratulations, mixed with questions about how she'd managed all of this. But I noticed Emma wasn't basking in their newfound respect. If anything, she looked tired. There's something else, she said as dessert was being served. Since I now own Peterson Associates, I suppose you're all technically my employees. Michael paled again. Emma, if this is about revenge, it's not, she interrupted firmly. Michael, you're excellent at your job. You've been with the company for 15 years because you're talented and dedicated. Nothing about your position changes because of who owns the company now. She looked around the table. I'm not interested in power trips or family drama in the workplace. What I'm interested in is building something even better than what Peterson and Associates already was. Uncle Robert leaned forward. And our contracts? Will be honored exactly as written, Emma assured him, though I might suggest some upgrades to your digital presence. We've developed some new technologies that could really benefit your stores. The conversation gradually shifted to shop talk, questions about the merger, about Emma's plans for the company, about how she'd managed to keep such a massive acquisition secret. But underneath it all, I could feel the fundamental shift in how these people saw my daughter. She was no longer the family oddity the dreamer who needed to get serious about her future. She was a force to be reckoned with, a brilliant businesswoman who had quietly built an empire while they weren't paying attention. As the evening wound down, people began making their excuses and gathering their things. Jennifer pulled Emma aside for what looked like an intense conversation, probably realizing that the owner of the company that had revolutionized her hospitals' patient care was someone she'd been politely ignoring for years. David shook Emma's hand with newfound respect, and I heard him say, "I'd like to take you to lunch sometime. Really talk about what you've built here. I think I could learn a lot from you." Uncle Robert was already talking business, something about a comprehensive rebranding for his stores, if Emma's team was interested. But it was Rebecca's conversation with Emma that surprised me most. As they talked by the entrance, I saw Rebecca actually listening, really listening, for perhaps the first time in Emma's adult life. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said, "about what you said earlier. About us never asking. You're right. We didn't. And I realize now that wasn't fair to you." Emma nodded. "I understand why it was hard to take seriously. Tech startups fail all the time. And I'm sure from the outside it looked like I was just playing with computers. But that's just it," Rebecca insisted. "It wasn't our job to take it seriously or not. It was our job to support you, to believe in you. And we failed at that." As the last guest departed, Emma and I stood in the now empty great room, surrounded by the detritus of the evening, empty glasses, crumpled napkins, the lingering scent of success and satisfaction. "How do you feel?" I asked her. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out the tall windows at the city lights below, the city where she'd built her empire while her family doubted she could build anything at all. "Different," she finally said. "Not how I thought I'd feel." "What did you think you'd feel? Vindicated, maybe? Triumphant? Like I'd finally proven them all wrong?" She shook her head. "But mostly, I just feel sad that it took this long. That it took buying their company for them to see that maybe the dreamer might have been onto something all along." I put my arm around her shoulders. "You did more than prove them wrong, Em. You proved yourself right. You proved that believing in yourself, even when no one else does, can move mountains." She leaned into me, suddenly looking much younger than her 25 years. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Always." There were so many nights when I almost gave up, when the code wouldn't work, when investors said no, when I had to fire people because we were running out of money. And the voice in my head sounded exactly like them. "Give up. Get a real job. Stop chasing fantasies." But you didn't listen. No, because there was another voice, yours, telling me that dreams backed by hard work aren't fantasies. They're plans. She pulled back to look at me. "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself." As we drove home through the Portland night, Emma finally asleep in the passenger seat after the emotional intensity of the evening, I reflected on everything that had changed in just a few hours. This wasn't just about money or business success. This was about recognition, about validation, about a brilliant woman finally getting the respect she'd earned a dozen times over. It was about a family learning that their definitions of success were too narrow, their vision too limited. But most of all, it was about Emma finally standing up and saying, "I am not your underachiever. I am not your cautionary tale. I am not the family member you tolerate out of obligation. I am the one who saw the future while you were clinging to the past. I am the one who took risks while you chose safety. I am the dreamer who dreamed so hard and worked so relentlessly that I turned my dreams into someone else's reality. And tomorrow, when the reality of tonight fully sinks in, our family will never look at the word dreamer the same way again." The weeks following the reunion transformed our family in ways I never could have anticipated. The revelation wasn't just a one-night shock that everyone eventually forgot about. It rippled through every relationship, every conversation, every assumption about success and worth that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. 2 days after the reunion, my phone started ringing. First it was Rebecca, then David, then even Aunt Patricia. Everyone wanted to talk, to process what had happened, to somehow recalibrate their understanding of who Emma was and what she'd accomplished. But more than that, they wanted to understand how they'd missed it so completely. Rebecca was the first to visit us at Emma's new house. I watched her take in the minimalist design, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the subtle but expensive artwork on the walls. It wasn't ostentatious. Emma had never been about showing off, but it was clearly the home of someone successful. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner," Rebecca told Emma as they sat in the living room, "about us never asking. And I realized it's worse than that. We never listened." Emma looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing acquisition documents. "What do you mean?" "You did tell us things," Rebecca continued. "You told us about your companies, about your clients, about what you were building. We didn't hear it. We heard computer stuff and internet, business, and we translated that into not real. It was true, and we all knew it." Emma had never been secretive about her work. She'd simply learned to speak about it in terms that didn't invite more dismissive comments. When she said she was working with some mid-sized businesses on their digital presence, she wasn't trying to be vague. She was trying to avoid the lecture about getting a real job that inevitably followed more detailed explanations. "I remember now," Rebecca said slowly. "Last year at Christmas, you mentioned your team was expanding to handle corporate consulting contracts. I asked if you were hiring, thinking maybe you needed a receptionist or something part-time. You said you were looking for senior-level strategic advisors with experience in traditional business development." Emma nodded. "I was. We hired 3 that month, actually." "I thought you were being pretentious," Rebecca admitted, her voice small. "I thought you were trying to make your little computer business sound more important than it was." The painful honesty of these conversations was both heartbreaking and healing. Emma handled each one with grace, but I could see the emotional toll it was taking. She wasn't angry. Emma had never been one to hold grudges, but she was deeply hurt by how thoroughly she'd been misunderstood. The professional implications were equally complex. Michael had worked at Peterson Associates for 15 years, had watched the company grow and evolve, had even participated in the strategic planning sessions that led to the acquisition. Now he had to face the fact that his new boss was the same young woman he'd been condescending to at family dinners for years. Emma's first all-hands meeting as CEO was scheduled for the Monday following the reunion. She'd asked me to come along, partly for moral support, partly because she wanted me to see how she handled the transition. The Peterson Associates headquarters was a modern glass building in downtown Portland, all clean lines and contemporary design. As we walked through the lobby, I watched employees' faces as they recognized Emma. Some looked surprised, others impressed. A few seemed nervous about the change in leadership. The main conference room was packed, over 100 employees, crowded into a space designed for 60. Emma had insisted that everyone be included, from senior partners to administrative assistants. She stood at the front of the room, looking remarkably calm for someone about to address a company she'd just acquired. "I know there are a lot of questions about what this acquisition means for Peterson and Associates," she began. "So let me start with what doesn't change. This company has been successful for 30 years because of the people in this room. Your expertise, your relationships with clients, your understanding of the market. That's what made Peterson and Associates worth acquiring. In the first place," she clicked to the next slide of her presentation. "What will change is our capacity to serve our clients better. The technologies my team has developed will enhance what you're already doing brilliantly, not replace it." Michael stood up from the back of the room. "Emma, I think I speak for a lot of us when I say we're curious about your vision for the company's future." It was the first time I'd heard him address Emma with genuine respect rather than familial condescension, and I could see the adjustment was still new for him. Emma smiled. I'm glad you asked. Our 5-year plan involves expanding into emerging markets while strengthening our position in traditional sectors. We'll be launching new service lines that combine Peterson Associates' proven consulting, expertise with advanced analytics and automation tools. She spent the next hour outlining her vision in detail. As she spoke, I watched the room transform. Initial skepticism gave way to curiosity, then to excitement. These weren't the empty buzzwords of corporate speak. Emma had a concrete, comprehensive plan for growth that built on the company's existing strengths. We're also promoting from within, Emma announced toward the end of her presentation. Sarah Williams will be our new Director of Client Relations. James Chen, no relation, will head up our new Digital Innovation Division. And Michael Chen will be transitioning to Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. The room erupted in applause. Michael looked stunned. Later, he pulled Emma aside. Emma, I don't know what to say. After everything. After how we treated you at family gatherings. Michael, Emma interrupted, you're brilliant at your job. You understand this industry in ways I'm still learning. The fact that you're also my uncle-in-law doesn't change that. I need your expertise, not your guilt. It was vintage Emma, forward-thinking, pragmatic, focused on results rather than revenge. The changes weren't limited to business relationships. David called the following week to ask if he could take Emma to lunch. Not a family obligation, not a polite gesture, but because he genuinely wanted to learn from her. I watched them through the restaurant window from my car, David leaning forward intently as Emma drew diagrams on napkins, explaining some aspect of her business strategy. When they emerged an hour later, David looked energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. She's extraordinary, he told me afterward. I mean, I knew she was smart, but Sarah, she thinks about business in ways I never even considered. She sees connections, patterns, opportunities that most people miss entirely. She always has, I reminded him. You just had to be willing to see it. David nodded slowly. You know what the hardest part is? Realizing that while we were all so busy giving her advice about real careers and practical choices, she was already building something bigger than any of us had ever achieved. The ripple effects extended beyond immediate family. Uncle Robert hired Emma's company to completely rebrand his furniture stores. Aunt Patricia, who ran a small wellness blog, asked for advice on expanding into e-commerce. Even Jennifer reached out about consulting opportunities in the healthcare sector. But perhaps the most significant change came from the youngest generation. Eva, Rebecca's daughter who'd been groomed for gymnastics excellence since childhood, started asking Emma about coding. Miles, the cello prodigy, wondered if there might be ways to combine music and technology. Emma embraced these conversations with enthusiasm. She started a monthly Tech and Treats afternoon where any family member could come learn about programming, digital design, or business development. Within 2 months, she had a waiting list. You're inspiring them, I told Emma as we watched Eva struggle through her first lines of Python code. They're seeing that there are paths to success they never knew existed. Emma looked up from helping Miles design a simple synthesizer app. That's what I wish I'd had. Someone to show me that the unconventional path wasn't just possible, it could be extraordinary. The family's entire vocabulary around success began to shift. Where once they'd talked exclusively about traditional markers, medical degrees, law partnerships, real estate portfolios, now conversations included questions about innovation, disruption, digital transformation. Emma started getting invitations to speak at business schools, tech conferences, women's leadership summits. Each headline, 25-year-old CEO revolutionizes traditional consulting, the quiet acquisition that's reshaping Pacific Northwest business, was vindication not just of her choices, but of everyone who'd ever believed in her along the way. But fame wasn't what motivated Emma. What drove her was the opportunity to build something that mattered, to prove that success could be defined in broader terms than the narrow categories her family had always recognized. 6 months after the acquisition, Peterson Associates had expanded to 3 cities, acquired 2 smaller consulting firms, and launched 4 new service lines. Employee satisfaction had increased by 40%. Client retention hit an all-time high. Emma was featured on the cover of Pacific Business Journal with the headline, "The Innovator Who's Redefining Success." The article detailed how she'd built her business empire through a combination of technical innovation, strategic thinking, and an unusual ability to see potential where others saw problems. At the next family gathering, Christmas dinner at Emma's house, the conversation was completely different. Instead of defending herself against skepticism, Emma found herself fielding genuine questions about business strategy, market trends, and leadership philosophy. Uncle Robert had brought a business plan for expanding his furniture stores into online retail. David wanted Emma's thoughts on incorporating smart home technology into his development projects. Even Aunt Patricia had prepared a presentation about her ideas for scaling her wellness platform. "This is what I always wanted," Emma told me as we cleaned up after dinner. "Not the money or the recognition, but the respect. The acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I knew what I was doing. All along." "You wanted them to see you," I said. "More than that. I wanted them to see that there are different ways to be successful. That innovation and creativity and thinking outside traditional boxes aren't just hobbies. They're essential for building the future." As the new year progressed, Emma's influence continued to ripple outward. She established a scholarship fund for students pursuing non-traditional career paths. She created an incubator for young entrepreneurs who didn't fit the typical Silicon Valley mold. She spoke at high schools about following your passion even when others don't understand it. At one particular speech, she addressed an auditorium full of teenagers who looked skeptical about career advice from another successful adult. "5 years ago," she began, "my own family told me I'd never amount to anything. They said I was wasting my time chasing fantasies, refusing to accept reality. And you know what? They might have been right if I'd listened to them." The room went quiet. The thing about being told you'll never amount to anything is that it becomes a choice. You can prove them right by accepting their limitations as your own. Or you can prove them wrong by refusing to be defined by their understanding of what's possible. She paused, looking out at all those young faces. "I didn't buy that company for revenge. I didn't build my business to spite my family. I did it because I saw a future they couldn't see, and I decided that future was worth building, with or without their approval." The applause was thunderous, but more importantly, I saw something in those students' faces: hope, determination, the radical idea that maybe the adults who doubted them might not have the final word on their potential. One young woman approached Emma afterward. "My parents want me to study accounting, but I want to be a game designer. They say it's not a real career." Emma smiled. 5 years ago, my family said the same thing about my work. Now that, not. Real career employs over 300 people and generates millions in revenue. The question isn't whether game design is a real career. It's whether you're willing to work hard enough to make it one. These moments became Emma's new mission. Yes, she was building a business empire, but more importantly, she was building bridges for others who felt like outsiders, who were pursuing dreams their families didn't understand. The transformation wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. Emma's confidence blossomed in ways that went far beyond business success. She started dating for the first time since college, joined a book club, took up rock climbing. She'd spent so many years proving herself professionally that she'd forgotten to live personally. "I realize now," she told me over coffee one morning, "that I was so focused on becoming successful enough that they'd have to take me seriously, I forgot that I could just be myself. Success or no success. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Emma had achieved everything she'd dreamed of and more. But the real victory wasn't the money or the company or the recognition. It was the freedom to stop caring quite so much about what they thought. A year after the acquisition, Peterson Associates was named Company of the Year by the Portland Business Alliance. Emma's acceptance speech was covered by local and national media. But the moment that meant the most to her came afterward when David approached the podium. "I want to say something about my niece," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "5 years ago, I told her she needed a backup plan. I told her that dreams were nice, but she needed to focus on reality." The room was completely silent. I was wrong. Not because dreams are more important than reality, but because I didn't understand that for some people, there is no distinction between the two. For Emma, dreaming and building have always been the same thing. She didn't escape reality, she expanded it. He turned to look at Emma. "We failed you by not seeing your vision. But worse than that, we failed ourselves by thinking our definition of success was the only valid one. Thank you for proving us wrong. Thank you for building a future we were too limited to imagine." As Emma stood to accept her own applause, I thought about all the nights she'd come home from family dinners feeling small and misunderstood. All the times she'd wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe she was just deluding herself. Success, I realized, wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving that the definition of success itself needed to change. That innovation and creativity and thinking differently weren't just valuable, they were essential. Emma had done more than build a company or accumulate wealth. She'd expanded what her family thought was possible. She'd shown them that the future belonged not to those who followed the established path, but to those bold enough to create new ones. And in doing so, she'd given every dreamer in our family, past, present, and future, permission to dream. Bigger, work harder, and refuse to be defined by other people's limitations. The girl who was never supposed to amount to anything had amounts to everything her critics thought impossible. But more than that, she'd amounted to things they'd never even thought to imagine. And she was just getting started. 2 years had passed since the reunion that changed everything, and Emma's story had rippled far beyond our family. What started as a moment of personal vindication had evolved into something much larger, a movement that was inspiring countless others to redefine their own definitions of success. The Peterson Associates empire now spanned 12 cities across the country. Emma had been featured on the cover of Forbes as one of 30 under 30 revolutionizing traditional business. But perhaps more importantly, she'd become a voice for everyone who'd ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they were dreaming too big. I sat in the audience at the Seattle Convention Center, watching my daughter deliver the keynote address to over 3,000 entrepreneurs, business leaders, and dreamers from around the world. The theme of the conference was Breaking Barriers, Building Futures, and Emma had been chosen as the opening speaker. 3 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the enormous auditorium, my uncle told me I'd never amount to anything. He said I was wasting my time chasing computer fantasies while other kids were preparing for real careers. And the audience was completely engaged, leaning forward in their seats. Last month, that same uncle asked me to mentor his daughter, who wants to start her own tech company. The transformation wasn't just in him, it was in an entire family's understanding of what success could look like. Emma clicked to her next slide, showing the growth trajectory of Peterson Associates after the acquisition. But this isn't a story about business metrics or financial success. This is a story about the courage to be misunderstood. It's about the strength to keep building when everyone around you is convinced you're building castles in the air. As she spoke, I thought about how far we'd all come. The changes in our family had been profound and lasting. Rebecca now ran a consulting firm that specialized in helping traditional businesses integrate new technologies. David had pivoted his real estate development company to focus on smart, sustainable housing. Even Uncle Robert had become something of a local business celebrity, with his furniture stores serving as a case study in successful digital transformation. But the real changes went deeper than career pivots. Our family gatherings had become incubators for innovation. Instead of comparing whose children had the most traditional markers of success, we shared ideas, collaborated on projects, and celebrated unconventional achievements. Emma had started a family foundation that provided seed funding for non-traditional entrepreneurs, people like the former teacher who wanted to create educational video games, the stay-at-home mom developing a revolutionary baby safety product, the college dropout building sustainable energy solutions in his garage. The myth we need to shatter, Emma continued from the stage, is that there's only one path to success, that you have to choose between stability and innovation, between family approval and personal fulfillment, between fitting in and standing out. 6 months earlier, Emma had received a call that would have been unimaginable just a few years before. Harvard Business School wanted her to serve as a guest professor, teaching a course on disruptive leadership in traditional industries. The same institutions that once represented everything her family thought she needed to aspire to were now seeking her expertise. I'd attended her first lecture, watching as MBA students frantically took notes while she explained how to identify acquisition targets that others overlooked, how to integrate cutting-edge technology into established business models, how to lead teams through radical transformation. Professor Chen, one student had asked, "How do you maintain company culture during such rapid expansion?" Emma smiled. "You don't maintain it. You evolve it. Culture isn't something you preserve in amber, it's something you cultivate. At Peterson Associates, we've learned that the best way to honor a company's legacy is to build on it, not to worship it." Her teaching philosophy reflected everything she'd learned from being misunderstood. She encouraged students to question conventional wisdom, to look for opportunities in places others saw only problems, to build bridges between seemingly incompatible worlds. The ripple effects of Emma's success story had reached beyond business and into social change. She'd been invited to speak at policy forums about supporting non-traditional career paths, at women's leadership conferences about redefining professional success, at youth conventions about the power of believing in yourself even when others don't. One particular speech still gave me chills. Emma had been addressing a group of high school dropouts in a program designed to help them get their GEDs. These were kids who'd been written off by the educational system, by their families, sometimes by themselves. "The world is going to tell you that because you didn't follow the traditional path, you've already failed," she told them. "They're going to say you can't compete with kids who stayed in school, who went to college, who followed all the rules." She paused, looking out at their faces, some defiant, some resigned, all hungry for something to believe in. "I'm here to tell you that's garbage." Some of the most successful entrepreneurs I know didn't finish high school. Some of the most innovative companies were started by people who couldn't afford college. The question isn't whether you followed the traditional path. It's whether you're willing to create a new one. By the end of that speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. 3 of those students went on to start their own businesses with funding from Emma's foundation. 2 more enrolled in coding boot camps and now work for major tech companies. One became a successful artist whose work is displayed in galleries across the country. Back at the Seattle convention, Emma was wrapping up her keynote with a challenge to the audience. "I want you to think about someone in your life who's been told they'll never amount to anything. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your child, your sibling, your friend. I want you to imagine what becomes possible when we stop accepting other people's limitations as our own reality." The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. As Emma left the stage, I saw people wiping away tears, others furiously typing notes into their phones, small groups already forming to discuss how they could apply her message to their own situations. Later that evening, at the conference's networking reception. I watched Emma move through the crowd. She wasn't just accepting congratulations. She was having real conversations with people about their challenges, their dreams, their stuck points. A young woman from Mumbai was explaining her idea for revolutionizing textile manufacturing. A father from Ohio was describing his teenage son's innovative approach to recycling plastic waste. A retiree from Tampa was outlining her plans to start a nonprofit using technology to connect isolated seniors with their communities. Emma listened to each one with genuine interest, offering advice, making connections, providing encouragement. This wasn't about building her brand or expanding her network. This was about Emma paying forward the belief that someone had once shown in her. "Mom," Emma found me near the end of the event, "come meet Dr. Johnson. She's been developing AR applications to help children with learning disabilities." As I listened to Dr. Johnson explain her work, I realized something profound had happened. Emma hadn't just succeeded in business, she'd become a catalyst for others' success. She'd created an ecosystem where non-traditional thinkers could thrive, where unconventional ideas were valued, where the question wasn't, will this fit into existing systems? But, how can we build new systems that work better? The next morning, as we flew back to Portland, Emma was already working on her next project. She'd received a call from the mayor's office about leading a task force on economic innovation for the city. The same community leaders who'd once politely dismissed her computer hobby were now seeking her guidance on preparing their city for the future. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Emma said, looking up from her laptop as we cruised above the clouds. "What's that?" "It's not Peterson Associates or the expansion or any of the business stuff. It's the family. It's watching Eva get excited about coding. It's seeing Miles combine music and technology in ways none of us imagined. It's having real conversations with Uncle Robert about innovation instead of just smiling politely while he lectures me about practical choices." She was right. Our family had become a living example of what became possible when people were willing to expand their definitions of success, when they chose curiosity over judgment, when they decided to believe in potential rather than clinging to preconceptions. 2 weeks later, Emma received a letter that made her cry. It was from a woman named Maria, who'd seen Emma's keynote speech streamed online. Maria wrote about how she'd spent 10 years being told by her family that her quilting hobby was a waste of time, that she should focus on her real job as a bank teller. Inspired by Emma's story, Maria had started an online platform connecting traditional quilters with modern designers, creating a marketplace for custom art quilts that was now generating 6 figures in annual revenue. More importantly, she'd found a way to honor her grandmother's teachings while building something new and vital. "Your story helped me understand," Maria wrote, "that the choice isn't between tradition and innovation. It's about finding ways to blend the best of both. Thank you for showing me that following my passion wasn't selfish or impractical. It was exactly what the world needed." Emma started a file of letters like Maria's. They came from around the world, a farmer in Kenya using drones to revolutionize crop monitoring, a grandmother in Japan creating virtual reality experiences for isolated elderly people, a teenage refugee in Germany developing apps to help immigrants navigate new countries. Each story was different, but the theme was the same. Someone had been told their dreams were impossible, impractical, or irrelevant. Emma's story had given them permission to prove those voices wrong. The transformation in our own family continued to deepen. At the most recent family gathering, for Emma's 27th birthday, the conversation around the dinner table was unlike anything I could have imagined just a few years earlier. David was explaining his latest project, a collaboration with Emma's company to create smart homes that adapted to residents' needs as they aged. Rebecca had partnered with a local nonprofit to provide free business consulting to women entrepreneurs. Even Aunt Patricia had launched a successful podcast about wellness and technology. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in how they talked about failure. Instead of being something to avoid at all costs, failure had become part of the conversation about growth, learning, and innovation. "I remember," Uncle Robert said, "when Emma's first company failed, I thought that proved she wasn't cut out for business. Now I understand that was like saying a baby isn't cut out for walking because they fell down the first time they tried." Emma laughed. "To be fair, Uncle Robert, most babies don't lose $50,000 when they fall down." The whole table erupted in laughter, including Robert. The ability to joke about past failures, to see them as stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks, had become part of our family's new DNA. As the evening wound down, Ava, now 16, and already running her own small web design business, pulled Emma aside. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Not just for inspiring me, but for showing Mom and Dad that success doesn't have to look like what they expected. They're actually proud of my coding projects now, not just tolerating them." Emma hugged her cousin tightly. "You know what the best part is? You're not going to have to buy a company to get their respect. You already have it." Later that night, as I helped Emma clean up, she reflected on how far we'd all come. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they'd believed in me from the beginning," she said. "If they'd seen my potential instead of my differences." "Do you think you would have accomplished as much?" Emma considered this carefully. "Maybe not. The doubting voices pushed me to work harder, to prove more, to build bigger than I might have otherwise. But more importantly, going through that experience made me understand how many brilliant people are being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. It gave me a mission beyond just personal success." That mission had become the driving force behind everything Emma did. Yes, she was building a business empire, but she was also building platforms for others to succeed. Yes, she was accumulating wealth, but she was using it to fund dreams that traditional investors couldn't see. Yes, she was gaining recognition, but she was using her voice to amplify others who were still being told they'd never amount to anything. 6 months later, Emma made an announcement that surprised everyone, including me. She was stepping back from day-to-day operations at Peterson Associates to launch something new: the Future Builders Institute, a combination research center, incubator, and educational platform dedicated to supporting non-traditional innovations and the people who create them. "I've proven what I set out to prove," she explained to the board of directors. "That unconventional doesn't mean unsuccessful. That different doesn't mean less than. That dreams backed by hard work and strategic thinking can change entire industries." The Institute's mission statement was quintessentially Emma: to create a world where every bold idea has a chance to flourish, where every dreamer has the tools to build reality, where success is measured not by conformity to existing models, but by positive impact on human lives. The announcement was covered by major media outlets around the world. Emma's story had become more than a business success story. It had become a symbol of what was possible when we refused to accept other people's limitations as our own. But for me, the most meaningful moment came a week after the announcement, when Emma and I were having lunch at a small cafe near her new institute's location. "Do you remember," I asked, "when you were 12 and spent all summer building that computer from scratch? You brought it to Uncle Robert's house to show everyone, and he said it was a waste of time because you could just buy one from the store." Emma smiled. "I remember. I was so excited to show them what I'd made, and they just saw it as playing with toys. You know what I see now when I think about that moment?" "What?" "The birth of everything that came after. That 12-year-old wasn't playing with toys. She was learning to see possibility where others saw problems. She was developing the skills to build solutions that didn't exist yet. She was becoming someone who could envision a different future and make it real." Emma's eyes welled up. "Mom, I need to tell you something. There were so many times I wanted to give up. So many nights when I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was just fooling myself. The only reason I kept going was because you never doubted. Even when you didn't understand exactly what I was building, you believed I could build it. You want to know the truth? I said. I didn't always understand what you were doing. Half the time, your explanations went completely over my head. But I understood you. I understood your passion, your persistence, your vision. And I knew that someone with that kind of fire inside them was going to create something extraordinary. As we sat there, I thought about all the young people who would benefit from Emma's story, who would hear it at exactly the moment they needed to know that being different wasn't a deficit. It was a superpower waiting to be unleashed. Emma had proven that the phrase, "you'll never amount to anything," wasn't a prediction. It was a challenge. And she'd met that challenge not with anger or resentment, but with grace, determination, and an unwavering belief that the future belonged to those brave enough to build it. The girl who was never supposed to amount to anything had amounted to everything her critics thought impossible. But more than that, she'd created a world where the next generation wouldn't have to choose between family acceptance and personal fulfillment, between fitting in and standing out, between following the prescribed path and forging their own way. As I watched my daughter, now a successful CEO, published author, sought-after speaker, and most importantly, a beacon of hope for dreamers everywhere, I realized that her greatest achievement wasn't any company she'd built or any award she'd won. Her greatest achievement was proving that the measure of a life isn't whether it fits into other people's expectations, but whether it expands what everyone thought was possible. And in doing that, she hadn't just changed her own story. She'd changed the story of what it means to succeed, to dream, to build a life that matters. The dreamer had become the architect of dreams, and the blueprint she'd created would inspire generations of builders to come. 5 years had passed since the reunion that shattered our family's understanding of success, and Emma's influence had grown far beyond anything any of us could have imagined. The Future Builders Institute had become a global phenomenon, with satellite locations in 15 countries and an online platform that connected millions of non-traditional innovators worldwide. I stood backstage at the United Nations headquarters in New York, watching Emma prepare for what would become one of the most important speeches of her career. She'd been invited to address the General Assembly on the topic of redefining global innovation, empowering the underestimated. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who'd been told she'd never amount to anything was about to speak to world leaders about the untapped potential in every corner of the globe. "Nervous?" I asked, straightening the lapel of her jacket. Emma smiled, that same mischievous grin she'd had as a child, now tempered with the confidence of someone who'd changed the world multiple times over. "Strangely, no. You know what I keep thinking about?" "What's that?" "That dinner table conversation? When Uncle David said some people just aren't cut out for success. If he could see me now." "He can see you now," I reminded her. "He's in the audience. They all are." Our entire family had flown to New York for this moment. Rebecca, David, Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, even some of the younger generation, who'd been inspired by Emma's journey. They sat in the distinguished visitors section, wearing expressions of pride that once would have seemed impossible. Emma's work with the Future Builders Institute had transformed not just individual lives, but entire economic systems. Her model of identifying and nurturing unconventional talent had been adopted by governments, corporations, and educational institutions worldwide. The statistics were staggering. Over 100,000 non-traditional entrepreneurs funded, millions of jobs created in emerging industries. Entire regions revitalized through innovative thinking. But Emma never led with numbers. She led with stories. "Delegates, distinguished guests, fellow dreamers," Emma began as she took the podium. 5 years ago, I bought the company where my uncle worked, not to prove a point, but to prove that points of view about potential can be dangerously limiting. The assembly hall, which moments before had buzzed with the usual pre-speech chatter, fell silent. Today, I want to talk about the greatest untapped resource on our planet, the underestimated, the overlooked, the people who've been told they'll never amount to anything. Emma clicked to her first slide, showing a map of the world dotted with thousands of lights. Each of these lights represents someone who defied the odds, who built something extraordinary despite being dismissed, discouraged, or outright rejected. A refugee in Lebanon who created a water purification system now used in dozens of countries. A grandmother in rural Kentucky who developed an algorithm that's revolutionizing crop yields. A college dropout in Nigeria who built a financial inclusion platform serving millions of unbanked citizens. As she spoke, I thought about how Emma's own journey had become a framework for recognizing and nurturing talent that traditional systems missed. The Future Builders Institute wasn't just an incubator, it was a new way of thinking about human potential. The myth of meritocracy tells us that cream rises to the top, that talent will always find a way, Emma continued. But what if the cream is trapped under layers of systemic barriers? What if talent is being filtered out by outdated definitions of intelligence, success, and potential? One of Emma's most successful initiatives had been the Second Chance Scholars Program, which identified brilliant minds in unexpected places. Former inmates who'd taught themselves advanced mathematics in prison, refugees who'd created informal economies in displacement camps, high school dropouts who'd become self-taught experts in emerging technologies. Maria Santos, a program alumna, had been working as a hotel housekeeper while secretly developing a revolutionary air purification system in her studio apartment. Discovered through the Institute's outreach program, she'd gone on to found a company that was now retrofitting buildings worldwide with her innovation. The traditional gatekeepers of opportunity, Emma said, often guard gates that lead to the past, not the future. They look for credentials, pedigrees, patterns they recognize. But breakthrough innovation comes from people who see patterns others miss, who ask questions others don't think to ask. Emma's own company had evolved into something unprecedented, a hybrid entity that was part research lab, part venture capital firm, part educational platform, part social movement. She'd proven that business success and social impact weren't just compatible, they were synergistic. In my home state of Oregon, she continued, we've created innovation zones in communities that traditional investors overlooked. Rural areas with high unemployment, urban neighborhoods with limited resources, tribal lands with rich cultural knowledge but little venture capital. The Oregon experiment had become a global model by embedding resources directly in overlooked communities rather than requiring people to leave their roots behind. Emma had discovered fountains of innovation that conventional approaches had missed entirely. A Navajo teenager had developed a solar panel design inspired by traditional weaving patterns that increased efficiency by 20%. A group of laid-off auto workers had created a modular housing system that was revolutionizing emergency shelter construction. A team of formerly incarcerated individuals had built a cybersecurity company that specialized in protecting nonprofit organizations. The future doesn't belong to those who follow established paths, Emma declared. It belongs to those who create new ones. And the most revolutionary thing we can do is refuse to accept that potential is limited by circumstances, geography, or the opinions of those who've never faced real challenges. In the audience, I watched Uncle David wipe away a tear. 2 years earlier, he'd joined the Institute's board of directors and had become one of its most passionate advocates. The man who'd once lectured Emma about needing a backup plan now spent his retirement consulting with unconventional entrepreneurs. Emma had also transformed how our family thought about legacy. Instead of accumulating wealth for its own sake, she'd shown them how to use success as a platform for creating more success in others. Rebecca had established a foundation that provided business mentorship for women transitioning out of abusive relationships. Michael had created a program pairing experienced executives with formerly homeless entrepreneurs. Even Aunt Patricia had found her calling, developing wellness programs specifically designed for overworked caregivers and single parents. The question isn't whether we can afford to invest in the underestimated, Emma continued. The question is whether we can afford not to. Every Einstein working as a patent clerk, every potential cure for cancer languishing in an underfunded lab, every world-changing innovation dying in someone's imagination because they couldn't get a loan, these represent incalculable losses to human progress. Emma's speech was being simultaneously translated into dozens of languages and broadcast globally. But beyond the immediate audience, I knew her words were reaching the people who needed them most. The dreamers who'd been told to be realistic, the innovators working in isolation, the entrepreneurs who couldn't find investors because their ideas didn't fit conventional models. I want to share a story, Emma said, her tone becoming more personal. 10 years ago, a young woman named Amara wrote to me from a refugee camp in Jordan. She'd been there for 5 years, having fled conflict in Syria with nothing but an engineering degree and a dream of building water systems for displaced communities. The hall was absolutely silent now. Amara had no access to funding, no network, no laboratory. What she had was ingenuity, determination, and a deep understanding of problems that needed solving. We provided her with initial support, not charity, but investment. Today, Amara's company employs over 500 people and has brought clean water to more than 2 million displaced persons worldwide. Emma paused, letting the impact of the story settle. Amara didn't succeed despite being a refugee. She succeeded because being a refugee gave her insights into problems that others didn't see, and urgency that others didn't feel. Her displacement wasn't a limitation. It was a unique qualification. This had become central to Emma's philosophy, that adversity often created exactly the perspective needed to solve the world's most pressing problems. People who'd experienced scarcity understood efficiency in ways the privileged never could. Those who'd been excluded from traditional systems often saw their flaws most clearly. As I conclude, Emma said, I want to issue a challenge to every leader in this room, every person watching around the world. Look for the potential in unexpected places. Invest in people whose stories don't fit familiar narratives. Support innovations that solve problems you've never had to face. She clicked to her final slide, a photo of a young girl in Bangladesh working on a laptop in what appeared to be a makeshift classroom. This is Rashida. She's 11 years old. Last month, she designed an app that helps farmers optimize water usage during droughts. Traditional venture capital would never invest in an 11-year-old girl from rural Bangladesh. But through our global network, Rashida has received funding, mentorship, and support to develop her idea fully. The image was powerful, but Emma's next words were what made the impact memorable. Rashida's parents told her she was too young, too poor, too female to amount to anything. Sound familiar? But Rashida represents the future, a future where innovation comes from everywhere, where problems are solved by those who understand them best, where potential is recognized regardless of packaging. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. But for Emma, I knew the real measure of success wouldn't be the applause. It would be the actions that followed. How many delegates would return to their countries with new perspectives on identifying and nurturing unconventional talent? How many young people watching would be inspired to pursue their own seemingly impossible dreams? After the speech, during the reception, I watched Emma move through crowds of world leaders, each wanting to discuss partnerships, investments, collaborative initiatives. But what struck me most was how she made time for everyone. The junior aide with an innovative idea, the student volunteer with questions about social entrepreneurship, the security guard who quietly mentioned his daughter's interest in coding. Mrs. Chen, a young woman approached me. I'm Dr. Patel. I work with the UN's Innovation Council. I wanted you to know that your daughter's work has fundamentally changed how we approach development challenges. She's shown us that the solutions often exist within the communities themselves. We just needed new ways of seeing and supporting them. As the evening progressed, I reflected on Emma's journey from misunderstood family member to global leader in reimagining human potential. But perhaps more remarkably, I thought about how her success had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of millions of others who'd been similarly underestimated. 3 days later, back in Portland, Emma and I sat in her office overlooking the city. The walls were covered with photos and letters from Future Builders Institute participants, a visual reminder of the ripple effects of believing in unconventional potential. "Mom, I've been thinking about writing a book," Emma said. "What kind of book?" "Something for kids who feel different, who don't fit the mold their families or schools expect them to fill. Something that helps them understand that being unconventional might be their greatest strength, not their biggest weakness." I smiled, remembering the 12-year-old Emma who'd written fantasy stories about misfit heroes saving the world. "What would you call it?" "Maybe The Gift of Not Fitting In or something like that. The idea that what makes you different is often what makes you valuable." Over the following months, Emma worked on the book, donating all proceeds to establish libraries in underserved communities worldwide. But more than just writing, she created an entire ecosystem around the book: workshops for educators, discussion guides for families, online platforms where young people could connect and share their unconventional dreams. The book launch was held at our old high school, the same school where Emma had been labeled a troublemaker for spending lunch periods in the computer lab instead of socializing. Now she was their most famous alumna, and students lined up for hours to get signed copies. One young student, a shy 15-year-old named Marcus, approached Emma during the signing. "Ms. Chen," he said nervously, "everyone says I'm wasting my time with my ideas about vertical farming. They say it's not realistic." Emma looked up from signing his book. "Marcus, can I tell you something? Some of the most important innovations in history were dismissed as unrealistic until someone made them real. The question isn't whether your idea is realistic, it's whether you're willing to make it so." She wrote something in his book, then added, "Also, here's my email. Send me your vertical farming proposal. Our institute is always looking for innovative approaches to food security." Marcus nearly fainted. But more importantly, he left that day knowing that someone believed in his potential, that his unconventional ideas had value, that being different wasn't a limitation. It was a superpower waiting to be unleashed. As Emma closed the last book, and we prepared to leave the school, I thought about how far we'd all come. The family that had once dismissed her potential now worked together on projects that seemed impossible just a decade ago. David's latest development was a net positive energy community that incorporated Emma's smart home technologies. Rebecca had expanded her consulting firm internationally, specializing in helping traditional businesses adapt to rapidly changing markets. Even Uncle Robert had become a tech influencer, his furniture stores serving as showcases for the latest in smart home integration. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Emma asked as we drove home. "What's that?" "That we changed the conversation, not just in our family, but everywhere. That we've created a world where kids like Marcus don't have to wait until they're 25 and own a major company to have their ideas taken seriously." She was right. The metrics spoke for themselves. The Future Builders Institute had sparked similar movements on every continent. Educational institutions were redesigning curricula to foster unconventional thinking. Investment firms were developing new criteria that looked beyond traditional indicators of potential. Governments were creating innovation zones in overlooked communities. But perhaps most importantly, families around the world were learning to see their black sheep differently, not as problems to be fixed, but as innovators to be nurtured. 6 months later, Emma received a letter that encapsulated everything she'd accomplished. It was from Rashida, the 11-year-old from Bangladesh whose water optimization app had been featured in the UN speech. "Dear Emma," the letter read, My parents used to tell me I was dreaming too big. Now they help me test my new inventions. My village has clean water because of the app I created, and now I'm working on a system to provide internet access to remote areas. Thank you for showing the world that big dreams come in all sizes, from all places, from all kinds of people. Emma had built more than companies or institutions. She had built proof of concept for a revolutionary idea. That human potential was distributed equally across all populations, but opportunity was not. And by changing how the world identified, nurtured, and invested in unconventional talent, she had unlocked solutions to problems that had persisted for generations. The girl who was never supposed to amount to anything had amounted to everything. Her critics thought impossible. But her greatest achievement wasn't personal success, it was systemic change. She had rewired how humanity thought about potential itself. And in doing so, she had ensured that no child would ever again have to choose between being themselves and being successful, between fitting in and standing out, between following the prescribed path and creating the future. The underestimated had become the architects of tomorrow, and the world was better for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.